3 months, or completion penalties will kick in. Get back to work now.
Who the fuck do you think you're talking to?
Well, it's just that the money to cash flow the material, pay my men, it's 3 weeks overdue now.
He's making a mug of you, Bob.
I'm gonna get it any day, all right? Any day, I promise.
There's just something about him I don't like.
And I want you gone.
There's a decent chance they go bust anyway. Richard, you said this was legitimate.
They're closing the scheme down Thursday. Warrants, dawn raids, the whole shebang.
You guarantee them on Tuesday.
I want that money. I want it now. We heard him on the phone.
What part of that do you not fucking comprehend?
Yeah, you can imagine how we feel.
On this episode of Nerdly Out Loud, and hopefully you will either be watching on the YouTube channel Nerdly UK, and if you are, please do give us a like and subscribe. I'm trying to be all professional now, so Phil's going to be super happy with that. If you're listening to the podcast, awesome, fantastic iTunes, Podbean, and everything like that. But for this episode, we are speaking to a director, Will Jewell, the screenwriter and director by trade, with credits for the BBC and Channel 4, including TV shows like Horrible Histories and Doctors, and the BAFTA-winning interactive short, Bow Street Running, which I'm going to ask you about in a minute, because I don't really know what an interactive short is. So we're going to touch on that a second. He also directed award-winning documentary South Coast and BAFTA long-listed Man in Fear, starring Luke Treadway. So not so long ago for Fright Fest, because of everything that happened this year, and 2020 has just been absolutely pants, Fright Fest went online. So they've been having virtual premieres and everything. And one of these movies was called Concrete Plans, which is William's movie, and a fantastic movie. So when this opportunity came along, there is no way I wasn't going to do it. How are you tonight, Mr. William Jewell?
Thank you very much. I'm very good, thanks. Yeah, Will's fine. And 2020 has been pants, you're right. I totally agree. But yeah, the film has been released. We released on Monday, albeit digitally. Obviously, the plan originally was to go have a theatrical run, and as you said, Fright Fest, that was originally going to be a couple of screens at Leicester Square, which I was quite looking forward to, but became online. But I think in a weird way that actually worked quite well.
I mean, I've been speaking to the guys behind Fright Fest, and they were gutted, really, that they had to go full on digital. But I mean, that's just been this year, really. So it is a shame that we didn't get to see it. Plus, those audiences, when they go to those screenings, Fright Fest is a die-hard audience. So for you to have seen Concrete Plans up on the big screen with that kind of reaction, that would have been awesome.
It would, yeah. I've always been intrigued by Fright Fest. I always thought initially it was a horror festival, but the more I've sort of dug into it over the years, I've realised they do have quite a few thrillers, and it's a bit broader than that. But I have seen the film one time this year in a cinema with an audience, which was
nice.
We had a screening in Brighton just before, in the before times, before lockdown, and we had like 200-300 people in a screening room. You didn't have to have gaps between the seats, and that was amazing, because you're never quite sure of your film and how it will play until you see it with a room full of strangers and have that communal viewing experience. And there's points in the second half of the film where it gets really tense, and I swear me and my editor was sitting there just watching the crowd, and I swear there were 10-15 minutes people just didn't breathe. I thought it works, that's what I needed to see.
That's the reaction we can all hope for when making these projects and everything. It's what you want, and that must be an awesome feeling. It must be. So I guess this is a little bit of a redundant question right now, because of everything that's going on and everything. But I do like to start with this, with the creatives and the guys like yourselves. How have you been keeping over the lockdown? How have you been? How's the creative mind been? Obviously, it's put a little bit of a dampener on the release and everything, going digital. But basically, how's the lockdown been for yourself?
I've been, as a screenwriter director, I'm sort of fortunate in that I can write at home. When I think of sort of crew and grips and things like that, there's nothing they can really do at home. That's tougher for them. I didn't get as much writing done. I kind of went into lockdown I've got all this bag of ideas. For the last 5-6 years, I've been working on Concrete Plans and coming up with ideas and sticking them in a box. I was really quite looking forward to dusting them off and seeing what gold was in there. But the realities of homeschooling a kid and trying to work at the same time.
Yeah.
I know a lot more about rudimentary maths and capital cities than I did before going into lockdown, but I didn't really get too much script writing done as I had planned to do, unfortunately.
I've been the same. We've got 3 little girls, and I didn't realize how much I didn't know. I used to think I was quite an intelligent person, or at least mildly intelligent. No, I'm not.
I found that quite embarrassing when your kids look up to you and they kind of like, they expect you to know everything. And, you know, I don't know how to work. I can't remember how to work out the volume of a shape. And so I'm having to Google it, and you can see the disappointment in his eyes. And it's, yeah.
There's nothing wrong with Google. It is everyone's friend. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my life a little bit easier, because I am terrible at prying into people's lives. And I'm going to ask you to sort of introduce yourself properly, a little bit about yourself and how you got into this crazy industry we call the movie business.
Right. Well, I didn't go the traditional route. I've been a kind of round the houses route. I did town planning. I worked in the council office doing town planning for a bit, but I always knew it's not what I wanted to be doing. But I kind of didn't mind having a day job doing that, because I was playing in bands and things. I always thought I'd end up doing music, but I was never a greatest musician. And some of the lyrics I was writing turned into short stories, and then they started turning into scripts. And I kind of went off on that tangent. And I did an evening class, to be honest, down in Brighton, and the guy who ran the class had a film company, and he kind of used it to look for new writers, and kind of collared me and said, you know, you can write. Have you got an idea for a film? I pitched him something, and he gave me his card and said, right, you got 6 weeks, write a feature script. This is what they look like. And I did, and he optioned it. So I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to write films. So I wrote a few more. They got optioned, and then managed to get an agent, ended up kind of writing a bit for doctors and bits of TV. Mentioned on Bow Street Runners an interactive drama. I fell into that. It was a strange, it's branching narratives, you know, like Bandersnatch.
Right, yeah.
It's that basically. I mean, it's sort of Charlie Brooker has brought it back, but there was sort of 10 years or so ago, soon as broadband and everything could host video convincingly, and you could click on this and go down that route, like the build your own adventure things without any too much buffering. I wrote Wannabes for the BBC and Bow Street Runner for Channel 4, and did quite a few of those. But then I think producers realised that, you know, people were only actually watching 40-50% of all the stuff that they'd shot with actors, and so they kind of went, hang on, what's going on here? So they kind of they got sort of phased out, but I think Bandersnatch is going to mean a second wave of that. So it was interesting. That was it was weird writing scripts in flowcharts and then trying to explain to actors what the hell this meant. So that was an interesting time. And then I did a feature documentary called South Coast, which was an accident and took 5 years. It was basically, I got a mate who was putting on sort of music nights, showcase nights for anti-Nazi League or battered wives, refugees and good causes. So he was getting really high caliber bands to come in. A guy called Kev I was at school with, and then basically I shot a hip hop showcase night, and the idea was we were going to do them a little promo for the next week, and it was just I was fascinated. They were so. They really had something. They kind of, I was really into hip hop as a teenager. Then it all got a bit boring, got a bit gangster, and it was just seeing that these kids had basically kind of, it had stopped trying to hate being American and actually absorbed it, and they were just rapping about stuff that was very true to them, and working in Asda and living at their mum's. And it was. I was like, wow, this is not what I expected. And then I filmed an open mic night, and some guy started being all homophobic, and one of the rappers just took the mic off him and went, nah. And I was there in the pit filming this and thought, this is not what you would expect, like, the man in the street's perception of hip hop. So I kind of started filming, and then 5 years later I had a feature documentary that did pretty well. It went loads of festivals, and it had this strange journey going from sort of quite lauded by the underground sort of music scene and hip hop press, to then it played at Glastonbury and all these places, and it ended up getting a name check in the Telegraph's Films of the Year, and the Barbican put it on for a special screening. So it had this weird journey from kind of underground to establishment recognition. But that was a strange few years. But and I kind of got back into narrative, and I've written bits for Huffington Post and bits of political satire, and I wrote this. I had this idea about sort of what is art and the boundaries of art. I think it was bits in South Coast. I was filming a lot with graffiti artists who were like hanging off sides of trains and risking their lives to do their work. And it was about why, it's risking your life to leave your mark and make art. And that kind of got the wheels going. And I ended up writing this. I wrote a feature, but then wrote a short called Man in Fear to sort of showcase the idea. And it's about conceptual artists who create accidents as works of art. And so that short, which we had Luke Treadaway in, was about this guy who's just on the edge because everything around him suddenly becomes this potential lethal accident, and no one will believe him that he's basically been named the subject to their next piece. So that premiered in London Film Festival, and we were in the New British Cinema Quarterly, so it was one of 6 shorts that sort of toured nationally, and there was quite a lot of interest in making that as a feature, but then I got called in, had quite a few meetings, but they sort of run the numbers and go, you've got all these big elaborate sort of mousetrap with big adult sort of building sites and things, set pieces, they cost a certain amount of money. This is your first feature. This is not a first feature budget. Go away and make a low budget feature, which is what I've done. So I should be going back and knocking on those doors at some point.
So is that you're going to follow that up and you're going to make a feature? Nice.
Man, I would like to. Yeah. I think that idea still kind of nags away at me, and I think it was interesting. I made the short, and we went to a lot of film festivals. I took that to it was a Moscow Film Festival, all over the place, and all the Q&As, people would go, "It feels like it could be a bigger idea," and I go, "It just so happens." Yeah, that's kind of me in a potted nutshell. And then 6 years ago, sort of started working on this little crazy idea about builders in the middle of nowhere. And here we are.
Seen this movie, we're going to get into it. I love the fact as well. I read somewhere that this also started as a short, but then you expanded it into a bigger thing. So we'll get into that in a second. But you're completely right. Like this deserved to be a feature, by the way, because this is a fantastic feature. I was really into this. But without any spoilers, what is your elevator pitch for Concrete Plans, and how did it come about? I guess we've covered that a little bit, but how did the seed?
Well, the elevator pitch for a while, my sort of one-line elevator pitch was Alfreda's Aim Pet meets Shallow Grave. or I love that. Or it's an inverse Straw Dogs, because we kind of seen it from the point of view of the builders. But they were my very glib sort of one-line pitches when I'd sort of had to do it in a very short space of time. But it kind of came from I couldn't get Man in Fear off the ground because of the budget, so I kind of was looking for a low budget idea. And the producer Rob Alexander, we were sharing this office in Brighton that was sort of stuffed full of little indie filmmakers with their 4 square feet of desk space. And he'd done documentaries like the Gary Newman Android and La La Land and Man Whose Mind Exploded, and he hadn't done drama, but he's making stuff, I was making stuff, and we were kind of circling each other in the office going, well, we should work together. So the kind of part of the roots, if we're going to make something low budget, originally we were putting it in for iFeatures, which is a sort of around the 350k mark, which is kind of similar to where it ended up. So I knew from that, low budget filmmaking, it has to be contained. You have to have not too many characters. You can't really do location moves to a huge extent. And so I'd written it as a short, as you say. There's a port cabin scene in the middle of the film, which is fairly pivotal, where they have to play cards for a big decision, and it's a big moral question. What would you do in their shoes? Kind of setup, that was the nub of the short film. I'm skirting around spoilers, but I thought I dusted that off and thought, you know what, I wrote this script, didn't make it. That is 5 people in a port cabin in the middle of nowhere. It ticks all the boxes for being contained and achievable. So I kind of grew it out from there and wondered, well, how did they get to that point, and then what would happen after? And I sort of wrote out a sort of 5-6 page outline, gave it to Rob. He went to Film Wales and said, look, we've got this idea. Any chance you could put a bit of development money so we can try and get it to script, see whether or not it flies, maybe see if we can attach a few people to it, go and do a few recce's. And Film Wales were great. They were the main backer. They put some money in. They liked the way it was going. We got a little more. and it kind of grew from there. Obviously, it's quite a long journey of development, but it's kind of the nature of getting a low budget film off the ground, really. So.
I was going to say that's one of the things that a lot of people who are out there, like listening to this or watching this, don't really understand about independent filmmaking, is that it is a process. It's, you know, like from script to screen, it can be as much as 10 years before you get it made. You know, like I've spoken to a few people on the podcast who it has literally taken that long. You know, it's not like your big Hollywood movies that, yeah, okay, they take 5-6 months or whatever to film, but they get it turned around pretty quick. Whereas with an indie movie, you're running and gunning for a good 10 years. It's a slog. But so what was that like to have that idea 5 or 6 years ago, write that scene intentionally for a short, and then 6 years later, premiering at Fright Fest?
Yeah, it's been a long old journey. You know, it felt a lot of times it wasn't going to happen. We put the shoot dates, we moved the shoot dates back about 2 or 3 times because we just didn't have the budget. Really, I mean, we shot it on a tiny budget. We shot the film in 15 days, which is insane. And we still, even trying to get that money together, we didn't quite have enough. We had a few funding issues with people, sort of funders moved the goalposts, and then we lost chunks of money, and we had to try and plug those gaps. So the good thing about that is it means that I must have written, I think Paolo, our production manager, told me I've written like 23 drafts or something, but I think that includes when we're on set and I was every night chopping bits in and out just to make it work from what we could realistically film on the day. So I think because I knew the script so inside out from that, that's helped me in the heat of the shoot, because insane shoot schedule. So, but knowing the story so well, I knew where the end goal was. So I knew, okay, we dropped a scene today. We're never going to catch it up. Look at the schedule. So what's the key bit from that scene we've missed today? How can I write that into a scene we're going to shoot tomorrow or the day after, and so that the story makes sense? And that was my biggest worry through the shoot, because the shoot was crazy. 15 days was if you're going to shoot this film in 15 days, it would tend to be 2 people in a room, not an ensemble with stunts and fights and all the rest of it. So it was pretty intense. And also that manor house, about 20 of the crew was sleeping upstairs in that manor house. That manor house was the kit store. It was the unit base. You see the scene in the dining room, this big posh long table dining room. That was basically the unit base where we'd all eat, and it was very much it was quite democratic. All the cast and crew were in there. Yeah, when you sign the contracts, the agents are all saying, and they will have green rooms, and they will have this, and you're going, It was just very, everyone's standing up and getting the food mucked in together, and it was a very kind of, there was no real airs and graces.
It's very much, it's not so much a horror as it's sort of a gritty thriller. There are some horror elements into it, and it does get a little bit brutal in there. I'll not go too far with that, but that is the overarching narrative. But there is, if you're willing to look into it, there's some very of the moment political hot potatoes in this movie through your characters. If you're willing to look for them, they're right there, right in front of you, and which I think it's a social fleeting statement, really, to Britain right now and the last 5, 6 to 10 years, really. Was this something that you consciously did with the characters? You just ingrained those through lines with these characters when you were writing them?
Yeah, it was strange, because obviously the last 5-6 years have been pretty eventful in the UK and politically and everything else. Yeah, and I kind of, I am quite politically aware, and I've written bits of political satire, and it was, I think a film has some kind of duty to reflect the time it's made in. So very much I think the country has felt a lot more sort of polarized and tense and nervous about the future, and all of these things, issues of immigration had come to the fore, and the fear of outsiders and prejudice was more of a tax evasion. All of these things are all woven through the fabric of the film. And the weird thing is when the referendum occurred, which obviously was, that really kind of polarized a lot of things and made these kind of, people didn't tend to agree so much. They took a side, and it all became quite, pick your team sort of times. And it felt that sense of division and class tensions all kind of was all happening. And I looked, when the referendum happened, I looked at the script, and one of our key characters is a Ukrainian migrant labourer who at that time was the Daily Mail hate figure and the tabloid bogeyman. It was all about all these things about polarization and class. They were all kind of ready in. I think the script was like third draft when that happened, and I looked at the script and suddenly realised that the trace elements were all there. So I just I lent into them because I wanted it. A lot of people have said, "Oh, it feels very now. It feels so topical," and it has soaked everything up there. So it is. It's a strange one. The film, I think, and I hope works on sort of two levels, that you could just sit down and it's a sort of slow burn, sort of socially aware build up of sort of Ken Loach-ish in a way, the first half of these builders and the sort of tensions between the haves and have-nots, and then it explodes into sort of a strap yourself in, let's go on this thriller. But, which you could just, I think, hopefully just enjoy on the face of it. But I think a lot of people will very much pick up on, okay, this feels very now. I can see that there's a lot of social relevance to what's going on in this film.
Yeah, I've got to be completely honest with you. The first time I watched it, it was literally one of those, I was watching it on the face of things and I was hugely entertained by the story. I loved the idea of the builders all kind of banding together and having, the shenanigans that goes on there. And then it was the second time I sat down and watched it, and I'm sitting there thinking, hang on, I see what you're doing here. But I mean, it's the sign of a good movie because there's something really to think about there. But one of the main questions I had on that was, is that why the building site setting works so well? Because typically, more than any other workplace I know of, that is where you're going to find the biggest diversity of people is on a building site, people from all sorts of backgrounds. So was it always on a building site, or does that play into the story as well?
I think it always, the short was always on a building site, and I'd always thought building sites, they got a really strong aesthetic. There's something about building sites, and I did a little bit of work on building sites in summers when I was a teenager, and I was a long-haired student at the time, so I had the piss ripped out of me. And it was a very kind of, it's all piss take and banter, and it's hierarchy, and trying to put someone down so you can get your position there. And there was all a lot of that, and it was quite kind of that was quite a strong element. But then you got all these very lethal power tools and stuff lying around. It always felt quite a potent cocktail that I thought would be useful to. And I think even then at that time I wasn't really a writer, but it stuck with my mind about it would be a good place to set something. And I've also things like the Dave character. I've always, when I've gone past a building site and you see some old boy and you think, oh God, man, you've probably been paid cash in hand a lot. I doubt you got much tucked away. As soon as your back goes or something, you do think, God, what's those guys who are getting on and working, labouring on sites? I kind of always crossed my mind what their futures are going to be. And I suppose Dave sort of embodied that's kind of dilemma of the aging manual labourer. So yeah, a lot of these things all fed in, but it was always in a building site in my mind. I don't know why. I suppose Dave sort of embodied that's kind of dilemma of the aging manual labourer. So yeah, a lot of these things all fed in, but it was always in a building site in my mind. I don't know why.
That's so cool. And I just wasn't sure if it was like I've got this mixture of different sort of topics I want to hit on with my characters, so it's going to be a building site because it's always diverse. But I like that a lot. One of the things, because
So there's another weird thing about building sites, because at the moment they're rerunning the Play for Today's on Tuesday nights. And last week I watched The Black Stuff, which then it was the pilot, and then they did The Boys in the Black Stuff. And I must have seen that when I was a teenager, and I didn't realise how much that stuck with me, because I watched The Black Stuff last week, and there's quite a lot of sort of trace elements that you can see. Oh, okay, the lineage of Concrete Plans coming out of that. So maybe that stayed with me. That was probably around the time I was doing little bits of building work, so maybe it was part of it.
That's cool, man. So considering this is technically your first proper movie feature, because obviously you've done shorts, you've done your documentary, but this is sort of like your foray into the movie feature. There's a very, very clear visual style to this movie. I'm not entirely sure if it's just the Wales setting, because Wales is a bit damp and grey, but there is a very clear style on the film. Sort of brought to mind for me the likes of Shane Meadows, Neil Marshall, and all that kind of thing. Are these sort of people that inspired your tone, or who did you draw from when shooting?
Okay, that's a nice, good question. It was, well, tonally, it was a bit of a marriage of sort of, I always loved sort of social realism, mentioned sort of Play for the Day and early sort of Roach and Mike Lee. So there was always elements of that, but then I always loved the sort of the big brutal sort of 70s cinema stylings of your kind of Sergio Leone's, your Scorsese's, Hal Ashby, those sorts of films. And that was something I was embracing with that whole gritty sort of 70s thriller feel, and even to the extent, because obviously we were doing everything on the cheap, the kit houses just give you whatever lenses and stuff they got on the shelf, and they happened to have this old set of vintage lenses because no one wanted to use them because they were old, but that really suited. Rachel, the DP, was working on this, did a great job, and we kind of, when I first sat down with her, I gave her like 500 images from films that I kind of thought there's something in this, I'm not sure, and we spent a day just going through and working out what the visual approach was, and a lot of it, the references I realized were kind of those 70s gritty films. And the sales agents came on board and put money in before the film, which was great. And Giles from the sales agents, he said to me, "Oh, this feels like a gritty Ken Loach film that gets hijacked by a 70s thriller in the middle." I went, okay, I'll take that. So there's, I think in terms of sort of more recent films, visual stylings and tone and influence were things like the Saulnier films, Blue Ruin, Green Room, Prisoners, sort of films like that, Animal Kingdom, got a hard edge to them, and those sorts of stylings, they would be sort of touchstones for more recent films. Blood Simple gets mentioned, I think, because of the I better not give a spoiler away, something that happens in this film. Someone meets a bad end, which I think happened in that, because I hadn't seen that film for years, but a few people mention that. So, and Coen Brothers has come up as a sort of as a stylistic touch.
Coen Brothers, that's an interesting one.
I've had in the reviews, I've seen Deliverance, Coen Brothers, Southern Comfort, Alfreda's Own Pet. You know, it's interesting. I didn't want to make a film in just particularly one genre. I wanted to weave together various things, and the sort of references that reviewers are seeing in there is so broad. It obviously succeeded.
I think the main one that I came up with, I mentioned it before, is like Shane Meadows. I'm a huge Shane Meadows fan. It's a hill that I'm going to die on, to be perfectly honest. I just think he's amazing. And when I was explaining this movie to someone else, I was kind of like, think about like early Shane Meadows, but like super polished. Like it looks beautiful, but it feels like a Shane Meadows movie.
It's got that grit. I mean, Dead Man's Shoes, I think was that kind of era, like you said, early Shane Meadows potentially. It's I can see I think as a filmmaker, you're a sponge and you absorb all these different things and then process them and put them out. There's probably a touch of that in there.
My wife, she caught the start of this movie. She didn't stay for the whole thing because it's really not her cup of tea. She doesn't like anything dark and gritty and British. She likes Friends. But one thing that she did stay to see was Steve Spears. We're both huge Stella fans. Obviously, he co-wrote Stella. He's such an amazing guy. How did Steve Spears come onto this film with you?
Oh, it's Steve. Steve was a joy. He actually didn't come on to about 3 weeks or so before. And I know, and I think the stars align with our cast, really. I mean, casting process is such a tricky beast, because we had some people have been on from very early. Other people, you have someone attached and then they get offered a Netflix gig or something, and they're looking at the tiny amount you're paying them versus Netflix. You're like, look, I'm not going to, off you go. Or they have, because we had to keep moving the dates, we had people in certain roles that then they were like, well, hang on, look, I've already got commitments now you finally firmed the dates up like third or fourth time around. So Steve came on board. He was just perfect. He'd been in my mind for the role. But then we had someone who was attached. And then when they couldn't, it was straight like Steve's always been kind of nagging away at me for this. And I think I always saw Uncle Bob as kind of cuddly. Uncle Bob was always my kind of thing. I wanted him to be that kind of, he is the good man who's desperately trying to hold it together while bad stuff's happening. And I think Steve, he got such an expressive face as well. I mean, there's some things with it's just his eyes when, you know, he can see that it's all slipping away, and it's tragic. And Steve just, and I think it was interesting because on set chatting away with sort of Steve and William had worked on things together before, I think William Thomas, and then obviously we had James Lance, and I don't know if it was a subconscious thing, but they're all known for comedy predominantly. You know, William's, I think he's the vicar in Gavin and Stacey and in Twin Town, which is a bit darker. As you said, you know, Steve's sort of known more for comedy, and you know, Jimmy I've worked with Jimmy on a few shorts because he lived in Brighton for a bit. In fact, Steve Spears lived in Brighton for years, so and Charlie Palmer Rothwell lived in Brighton for years, so we'd stand in Wales talking about Brighton, which was quite weird. And yeah, they all kind of had, you know, quite a lot of their iconic roles were in comedy, and the three of them were sort of, it's great to really get our teeth into something dark and dramatic and really flex these muscles. I think Steve said at one point, he goes, "We know if you can make people laugh, you can make them cry," and it's that. Yeah, he was great. He just embodied Bob to be because Bob's the pivot that you have these sort of different factions, you know, revolve around, and Bob needs to be the very human kind of glue that's just the good man trying to hold everything together.
Utterly perfect. I mean, he embodies the sort of the working man, every man. He embodies I'm going to come here and I'm going to do my job to the absolute best of my ability. I'm going to make sure everybody else does their job, but they're also going to get paid. I'm going to make sure of that, which is why when, and no spoilers, but when things really, really go, you are so heartbroken for him as a character. And then even when he sort of pulls it round a little bit, you're just utterly destroyed by him because it's Steve Spears.
There's actually a scene we end up having to cut for kind of pace of when he's on there's a scene where he's on the phone and he finds out a big sort of secret, but he actually made another phone call before that back to his wife, and that was heartbreaking. And I just that was one of my biggest kind of, we just had to cut it. It was the first half of the film, we had pacing issues with it, and that was quite a heartbreaking cut because you love him and cry even more because that scene was just heartrending.
So, as you said, you've got this fantastic cast. You've got an amazing cast. You've got Dave Dewey in there, who is utterly fantastic. Charlie Palmer Rothwell, who, until watching this movie, didn't realize it was Patsy Palmer's son. So that's on me. But he is utterly fantastic. I loved him in Legend as well with Tom Hardy. Just utterly great actor. Plays a great gobshite, as you say in your press kit as well. Definitely. James Lance, who, being a massive Spaced and Alan Partridge fan, like as soon as he came on the screen, it's James Lance. Thank God. You have a fantastic ensemble cast. This is a low budget movie that took a long time to get going, and then you shot it in 15 days. But the chemistry around the table scenes is utterly fantastic. Like, how long did these guys have to get there, to get the camaraderie going and the little infighting and how long was it?
Just one day.
Oh my Christ.
Yeah. Yeah, which is nuts. But that's why I was something I was really worried about, was because you've got to get an ensemble. You've got to make it believable that these guys are kind of this. There's a hierarchy in the group and there's a pecking order and all this. And Steve actually said to me, "Oh, you know, sometimes ensembles can take like, you know, a week to gel." And I was thinking, we haven't got a week; we've got 3 weeks to do the entire thing. But then when we did the table read, there was like a crackle in the air, and you could kind of like, "Oh, okay." And like the first, in that first week, I'd sort of said, "Look, I really want you to get into the skin of this ensemble and where you all are in the pecking order of the group." So I'm not going to call cut once you finish the scene. Just carry on rolling for a couple of minutes and just improvise within your characters, and, you know, take the piss out of each other, needle each other, whatever that little gripe you had in the scene, just carry it on, keep needling each other, you know, so that helped. Like the scene around the campfire, I had them improvise for about 5 minutes, and some of that stuff was absolutely gold. So it was things like that, and I think we just got very lucky. The chemistry just worked, because we were, you know, that manor house was everything. It was our base. Because we had the 1 day of rehearsals, so a lot of the crew were arriving because they were living upstairs at the manor house. they were walking in and they could see the table read at the far end of the table, and they could just walk in. You could see them going, "That's Bob. That's, oh my God," and because that's Jim. That's like, and you could see. And I think there's a point Amber sort of stopped and went, "I love the mix of accents around this table." And there was a bit of a tingle, and I thought at that point, you might just get away with this. Yeah, and credit to Ollie Gilbert, casting director. He was great. I kind of worked with him a lot in terms of he got who I was after, or who the characters were. He's an ex-actor himself, so he really kind of, he's go, okay, so-and-so's unavailable, but have you thought of so-and-so? Oh, that's a great call. So he was a really instrumental part in pulling that together.
Yeah, man, awesome. And one of the places that they really do shine, we've danced around it a little bit. There are two pretty pivotal scenes. One of them, as you say, is the one that sort of the whole thing was written around, and the other one is the same sort of scene but a little bit earlier in the film. How important for yourself was it for these actors, and how important was it for them, because there are such pivotal scenes around those tables, to get those scenes nailed in such a short time, in such tense conditions?
I mean, that bloody porter cabin, that we're shooting in there when you've got all the crew, and you want to have a word with an actor. It's like, excuse me. You've got to squeeze past 6 people and Kit to say have a word, and then excuse me back. Oh, the day we wrapped shooting in that porter cabin was the biggest cheer of the shoot. It stunk in there by the end of it. You got 20 people squeezed into a small, hot little space. Yeah, those scenes, it was literally, it's a wide and then a single on each. There wasn't much, it's not many options. In fact, there's 2 porter cabins, and the smaller one, it was so narrow, you could only put the camera, well, which end do we put in the camera? Wasn't exactly any other options. But those scenes, the 2 card scenes are very pivotal. And weirdly, the quite a few of the actors didn't know how to play poker, which surprised me. I had to teach. So Chris Riley, who plays Jim, and he's the dealer in those scenes, I had to teach him to play poker, and he was very, he wants everything to be right, and so as an actor, you've got to feel truthful. So I'd have to teach. He really wanted to learn, and then I'd have to give him the order of the cards so we could then make the deck, and we had a spare deck ready so that when he dealt them, they were exactly the cards they should be. Yeah, there was a lot of things like that you just assumed everyone knows how to play poker. That's to have 2 big pivotal poker scenes, and with them not knowing poker before, it was quite a strange one. In fact, actually, I think it's launched this week. We've done an interactive trailer around where the Jim character, he offers you a game of cards with a very high stakes potential outcome, let's say, without giving too much away. And we've created this because I did all those branching narrative things we referred to earlier. Yeah. We've done one of those where basically you get some clips from the film, and then he turns the card and says to you, "Okay, you want to play the game then?" And there's randomized outcomes, and you actually play a game. You can play 4 or 5 games of cards with him. And Chris filmed all these little bespoke little pieces where he's looking you in the eye. So that will get launched soon, and that's actually you can play cards with him for these very high stakes.
And these are the things that the big companies forget about, and the guys at your level are doing this, and that is what's fantastic about British independent film, because we go the extra mile. Now, I've been quite excited about this one, because there is a track, a song track from many movies that I absolutely love called Halcyon, and you somehow, I don't know how you've done this, managed to pull Paul Hartnell of Orbital fame to do the soundtrack to this movie, which is why it sounds synthy as balls and awesome. How did you get Paul Hartnell to jump on and do this soundtrack for you?
Cynthia's balls. That's going on the poster. It was a weird one. It kind of Brighton's being Brighton here. There's a lot of people down here who sort of work in creative sector, I guess. Yestin George, who used to be editor of the NME years ago, he lives down here, and he's a good mate of our producer Rob. He knew we were looking, to someone to do the score, and he was mates with Paul. So he said, "Look, do you want me to hook you up?" So this was about a year and a half before the film. I was like, "Paul Hartnell, yeah. Fat boy." So I went met him for coffee, and then sort of got chatting, and we just kind of pinged playlists to each other for about a year and a half before the shoot. And I think he was being a little bit cool because he was sort of indie films budget. Will it happen? Will it, won't it? So I think he was probably humouring me for a bit, but then and I'll bring him up, said it's happening, and it was, oh great. Nice. And it was really nice just pinging the playlist back and forth, because he's it surprised me, because I guess Orbital being so known for electronica, he's a real folk aficionado. And so he really, he's a dark horse, Paul. He's very knowledgeable. He's a real cineast as well. So, we would be pinging tracks to each other, and have you seen this film, and pinging references back and forth. So a lot of our touchstones. He's very sort of 70s folk horror. He really likes. We brought some of that flavour to it.
Definitely.
So a lot of it was kind of just doing that and finding what our sort of palette was going to be. So we'd done quite a lot of that work before, and then when I came back with the rushes, and he came around my house a couple of days after I got back from Wales, and sat there and showed him some sequences and things, and it's interesting, we talked about sort of what's the emotion for this scene, and because I came into sort of film from playing in bands, so I could speak pidgin music. I'm a pretty crap musician, but I can just about communicate in that kind of that language. And he's very cine literate. He scored Peaky Blinders season 2, and he scored a few films. And he's very, I think it's a field he's looking to do more in. And he's got such a great ear and eye. He really, I think that the score just lifts it to another level, the film. It was slightly challenging, because from the off, it had always been the deal that Orbital were going on tour in that summer, and they got lots of festivals lined up. So we had him until this very fixed date, and then the edit overran. So, he was having to hit a moving target and was having to score a film that was still changing and being edited. So that's anyone's idea of a nightmare. But listen, it was very even, very, it was strangely, strangely went fairly smoothly. I mean, me and Dave Wigram, my editor, we were in the room for about 4 months cutting this, and then Paul, there'd be a ping, and Paul had sent this track for this scene that we'd sent him a rough of. We'd open it, and 8-9 times out of 10 you'd lay it down and go, he's got it again. We'd had all that discussion beforehand, and he knew the sort of colour and tone and emotion for each of the scenes, and he'd have to do a few different cuts of it, because we were still finessing the scenes, which I'm sure was a little frustrating for him. But I mean, I just love the score he's done. And it's a great score, and a few of the reviews that I've seen, they specifically point that out in many places, because it is fantastic. It is a great score. I mean, two things for me: if you give me saxophone or you give me synth, I'm a happy man. So obviously we're on about the porta cabins before, and there are action scenes in this movie, and there are a couple of little fights. How on earth did you manage to do some of these fights in those porta cabins? Because my Christ. Yeah. I mean, those porta cabins were the bane of our lives. I think one is still on the farm. Basically one of them they were both condemned. One of them we had to put a new floor in, and the farmer's using it to store sheep or something in now. And the other one but they were very, very tight. It was just a lot of, we all got to know each other very well, to be honest, squeezing that tiny porta cabin. I mean, it was tricky. I mean, it was, I think Amber cut a hand on, there was a notice board, and it was just it was a lot of choreography. And when they're rolling around, bless them, the actors were all great in terms of stage combat and things. There was very little. It would be, here you go, you've got to have a fight in this tiny little 6 square feet here, while we're all going to be up on a step ladder with the camera, so please don't knock us off the ladder. It was all pretty seat of the pants, the whole thing, really.
And how many times during editing, or during the final cut, or during sitting down and watching it, when Steve does his thing, which again I'm not going to do spoilers, but gets the upper hand, how many times did you punch the air? Because I know I did.
Which we're alluding, because well, Steve is a character and Steve is Steve Spears, and then William gave it to Will as well, so it got quite confusing on set. Like, Steve is someone being in character, and then Will, was it me or is it William?
Steve Spears.
So Steve Spears getting the upper hand in
with the nail gun.
It was that there were some scenes in there that were. They are emotional gut punches. I think when you're in it, it's just like you've got somebody going, we're running on the scene. You're not, when you're shooting it, it's just we've done it, let's move on to the next one. But then you're in the edit and you sit there, and sometimes you've got a bit more space, and you look at them and go, God, it's heartbreaking. And yeah, Steve, he's just, I think the tone of his performance, I think to be honest, all of them,
everybody's
Goran a real soul to it. Someone said after we did a test screening that Goran was kind of the soul of the film. Bob is the heart of the film, and Dave, who's the old guy's William Thomas. I kind of said to him, in another life, you're a wise village elder, but in this life, you're on the scrap heap. So basically, it's that. And then I think, in terms of the tone of the performance as well, I think Chris, who played Jim, he really, my big thing first talking to him was, I don't want it to be, the stock baddie character. And he just brought all these layers to it. I mean, there's even a point in the study scene in the second half where he knows, they've gone this far, they're having to do worse and worse things. And there's almost a point in his eyes of that, and they're having to do something that kind of crosses, I think, his kind of working class code of ethics, and you can see how much that pains him. And there's a vulnerability, and there's the scene where him and Amber have the note for that scene was very much play it as a spaghetti western, so it's very slow paced, and it's a spaghetti western standoff. To me, there's always a little bits of DNA of spaghetti western in this, because you've got these
definitely
the tropes of it with hard bitten weathered guys in the middle of nowhere up a mountain who suffer a sense of injustice, and they're trying to get to what's theirs. It always felt very Western, kind of the subject matter of it. So there were certain scenes that I kind of were played as nods to some of the Sergio Leone and films like that I kind of grew up on.
That's so cool, man. That's so cool. But it is like I do, and I know I keep picking out certain performances and everything, but everyone is utterly brilliant. I mean, when the film first starts, you kind of fall in love with Goran, and you're kind of like, right, this is who I'm playing, this is who I'm taking the journey with. And then obviously certain things start happening, then all of a sudden you move over to this character, and it's like, actually, this guy represents me now. It's great. I love the characters and the way you've written them. So
the thing, it is very democratic. It is a true ensemble, and a lot of ensembles, it's a kind of lead character with a few mates.
Yeah.
Whereas it's very hard. I never use the word lead character on the shoot at all, because I think they all. I was very keen that they all had a kind of inner life and a journey, and they all felt well rounded. That was kind of having such a long development period. I could really hone each of those characters, and I think that was the biggest thing going through the different drafts, was finding as a formula, do we have too much Victor in this one and too much Steve in this one, and so just finding that right combination was took quite a few drafts.
So we're going to start wrapping up a little bit in a minute, because I've taken up far too much daytime already. You've been awesome, but I do want to ask this is probably a little bit. A lot of people don't like being asked this question, but you have made this movie. It has taken you 6 years to make this movie. You have got this movie out in the world, or whether it be on digital or physical, you've got it out there. People have seen it on the Fright Fest virtual thing. They're going to be able to see it properly now. How awesome is it to have this out there?
It's a big relief. It is having a baby. It's out there. Your baby's kind of running now. It's a toddler. It's out on its own feet and is running, and it's getting great reviews. And when we screened at Fright Fest, it was weird not being in a cinema and being able to feel the room and seeing how many people were in there. But actually, I think the digital thing, I think the Fright Fest guys did a great job, because all day I realized I was getting messages pinging from mates up north and people I hadn't seen from ages, and family here and there, and you realize actually it's got a far wider reach. And then after the film, social media is going nuts, and there's all these people you've never met tweeting about they love your film, and then the reviews started rolling in within an hour, and you're like, wow, okay, you can't see these people watching your film, but they are all out there. It's very fragmented, and everyone's out there in their own little bubbles, I guess. But
bubbles. I like that.
But so it's a massive weight off. It's nice to start thinking about new projects as well, because obviously 6 and a bit years now, sort of this has been the main focus. So it's nice to kind of it's out, it's done.
I know exactly what you're saying, because I did a sort of like a Q&A after another movie that premiered at Fright Fest as well, and they asked me to sort of moderate a Zoom Q&A. So we sent out the invites after the movie had premiered. You can come in, jump on this Zoom. We're going to close it off at a certain point. You can ask questions to the directors, the actors, and everything like that. It was really cool. But what I noticed was, for the first like half an hour to 40 minutes of it, they were just checking their phones. I'm sitting there asking questions, but they're sitting there getting tweets and, oh my god, there's another one. It was interesting and, dare I say it, quite electrifying.
Yeah, it's all real time. It's all very 2020, isn't it? It's we are all living on screens, and I think the future's been kind of supercharged in terms of when everyone does a sci-fi thing. In the future, we're all living at home or in pods and communicating via screens. It's kind of 2020, isn't it? So yeah,
it's 2020, and I hate to say it, but I think it's going to be our lives moving forward as well. Hopefully not too much.
Yeah, I'm quite envious. The film is actually playing in cinemas in Wales next week because Wales came out of lockdown earlier. So if anyone get along to Chapter and see it. So, but I'm looking forward to getting back in the cinema.
Definitely. I've been feeling it. But you quickly mentioned just there that you're looking forward to going onto the next project, what you've got cooking up in that lab of yours. So what's next for William Jewell? What do you have coming up? Anything you can tell us about?
Yeah, a few things. I've written a pilot and a series Bible for a idea set on a clinical drugs trial that isn't what it seems, which is called 10 Blind Mice. So I've got a couple of producers taking that out now, which I realised actually the other day is about a group of people who are kind of isolated and things start going wrong. So I must be, I don't know, an inner fear or something. Then I made a short called Man in Fear that kind of did kind of quite well, got a theatrical run, part of New British Cinema Quarterly, and got a lot of festivals. And that was made as a sort of taster for a feature, and it was about conceptual artists that create accidents as works of art. It was a sort of what if based on the YBAs and Hurst and Emin and Sarah Lucas and all those guys, just taking some of their crazier ideas and kind of running with them. So I made a little short that was a proof of concept for that, and that did pretty well and got a lot of interest at the time. But because I had these big elaborate sort of accident set pieces, like a kind of adult game of mousetrap and this chain reaction leading to this, I got called in for a lot of meetings, but they sort of run the numbers and go, this isn't the first film budget, so go away and make a low budget feature and then come back. So that will be 2021, knocking on those doors again and saying, here's my low budget feature. Remember me, Man in Fear guy? So
look at these reviews.
Yeah, and there's a couple of other little TV ideas I got in the go. There's one, weirdly, in terms of sort of story worlds, is sort of the story of Dave's sister from Concrete Plans. There's a bit in the film where there's the class, obviously there's a lot of class kind of clash in the film when he's saying, look, I know about rich guys. My sister worked at this tile company for 40 years, and then the boss declared bankruptcy and opened the company in his wife's name the next week and wiped the pension pot. Very Philip Green. And it kind of riffs on that. It's about pensioners who get ripped off for their pensions and they turn to crime in their sort of 60s. And so when it originally came from being the story of Dave's sister. So nice. It's kind of grown out of this. So yeah.
Sounds like a Michael Caine movie in the making.
Well, potentially, yeah.
Right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to let you go, my friend. This has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on and doing this. But before you do, just let people know where they can find Concrete Plans and where they can find yourself if they want to find out more.
Okay, well, Concrete Plans is out now on all the digital platforms. So everything from Xbox, Google Play, iTunes, Amazon, obviously the biggie, to Rakuten, which I've never heard of. But it's pretty much every digital. Well, I think BT, Virgin, Sky. It's on all of those. So, and I'm on willjewell.com, so you can see about how those other projects kind of bubble up and come to fruition, hopefully. But yeah, the film is out, so catch yourself a bit of Concrete Plans. And I think Paul's releasing the soundtrack soon as well.
Nice. And anybody out there who is watching this or listening to the podcast or anything like that, you absolutely need to check this out. If just anything, it's a great British, just independent film that needs to be supported and people need to see it, and it is getting great reviews, so you better. That's all. I just like to end it with you better watch it or else. But honestly, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on. I've really enjoyed this. I love getting to know more about these films that, you know, seemingly come out of nowhere, but they've been a passion project of someone's, and it's just great to try and get some eyeballs on it, and I loved it.
Well, thank you very much. That's great. Brilliant.